to say. Talk to me. Talk to me in your own special way. That's right. Welcome, New Mexico, around the country and around the world, if you're listening. Welcome to Dialogue, KSFR's Friday evening talk show where the conversation starts with you. I'm your host, MK. I'd like to begin every broadcast with a huge thank you for listening this week and or any week. I always consider it an honor to have you join me and take the time out of your busy lives to give me a listen. It means the world to me, and I can always only hope it means as much to you. Joining me is a real mover and shaker in the country, and we are now lucky to have him right here in Santa Fe. His name is Robert Egger. He is the founder and former CEO of the DC Central Kitchen, which he led for 24 years, and now it's celebrating its 30th anniversary, 7 days a week. He's been a leader in the food recovery, job training, social enterprise movement since 1989. His organizations have used donated food to produce over 40 million meals and helped thousands of men and women gain full-time employment. He's an award-winning author with his most notable book entitled Begging for Change, and a sought-after speaker on subjects ranging from innovation, leadership, the role of nonprofits, and social enterprise. His work has inspired others to see opportunity where we often don't, courage where there is fear, resource where there is waste, and hope where there is all too often despair. His goal is to move forward a vision for a new way of doing business that he calls Just Smart. It utilizes strategic and intelligent design and policy that promotes greater partnerships in both the profit and nonprofit sectors together and collectively, which builds and sustains a deeper, richer fabric to the very landscape of our lives. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us
right
today.
on, man. Thank you, MK. That was a great intro.
Well, hey, you inspired it. What can I say? So let's begin with a little bit of your own background. How did you get involved in social enterprise? What inspired it?
Well, man, as a kid, I grew up in the 60s, and I was, very much raised looking directly, almost daily, at people that we, acknowledge now, whether it's Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy, Dr. King, Gloria Steinem. I mean, these people who were really influential in my young life, and that sense of what it meant to be an American, that your job as an American is to push, is to never be satisfied, always be committed to making the country a better, stronger place for all. So, but I was intrigued by music. I ran nightclubs as a kid. As a young man, I dreamed fervently of opening the greatest nightclub in the world, and really pursued that path with great diligency, throughout my 20s. But it also happened to coincide with the kind of explosion of homelessness in America. And so, like many people, I would walk to work, and you couldn't help but see this kind of growing number of men and women and at times families in our nation's capital where I had lived as a young man. And one day I went out to serve people, and that night with my beloved wife, we ended up kind of serving hundreds of people out by the White House. But I asked two questions. Where does the food come from? And found out it was purchased at a very expensive grocery store. And I thought to myself, dang, part of my industry, whether it's nightclubs, but hospitality in general, we throw away tons of food every day. And more importantly, I asked, when I started meeting people in line who I assumed would be like many people do when you think of the homeless, you have at times a stereotype and oftentimes even a bigotry about who's in line and why. I came to find many, many men and women who were really super lucid. And I kept thinking, wow, why doesn't, restaurants have food, but they also have jobs. It would be so fascinating to start kind of a cooking school for the homeless. So, I just pursued that for, trying to help existing charities change their model. But I was fascinated because no one thought it would work. Everybody said restaurants can't donate food. It's illegal, and it's never been illegal. And more importantly, people said, restaurants won't hire men and women who have been addicts or who've been in prison or on the streets. And I've always laughed because it's like, who do you think works in restaurants? I mean, restaurants are the island of misfit toys. Yeah. So no one would do it. So in 1989, using food donated, interesting enough, our first pickup of food was George Bush Sr.'s inauguration. So on opening day, we took food from a presidential inauguration to train people for jobs so that while they learned, they could prepare healthy meals for other people who might begin their journey off the street and back into society. And I've been doing it ever since.
And that's DC Kitchen.
Yep.
Turned into DC
Yeah,
Central
DC Kitchen. And the model was pretty, rapidly. And of course, it was right time, right place. And I've said this many times, I'm a white dude in America, man. The doors flew open and no one, I had a few, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't as hard as you might think. But more importantly, it was at the beginning of the internet and cable television. And so here we came along with a nightclub background, in effect in the nation's capital with, whether it was CNN or any of dozens of other outlets who wanted a great story. And here we were training people out of prison who, again, most people viewed as part of the problem. And what we were saying is, man, that's the wrong way to approach this. I mean, these are men and women, and it's been said many times, some of our best entrepreneurs in America are behind bars. Mm-hmm. So it's just, changing the focus a little bit and revealing through the power of food the everyday opportunities that present us if we acknowledge that those men and women have a role to play in our society. Absolutely.
And one of your quotes I see was, you see food as power and people as potential. And you clearly you were one of the first, if not the first person to create a form of social enterprise. I mean, this is that you were.
Well, we called it righteous enterprise. Yeah,
righteous
back then.
Enterprise.
But it was this idea of you know how it evolved, man, is here we were teaching people, right? And I've always focused on who's at the bottom, who's next in line in America to be poor and on the outside. And so it went from heroin and alcohol to crack. Then in 1996, it was welfare reform. And suddenly we were training women who had very little work history and, family issues of transportation, childcare. But suddenly we had, and it's still to this day, the return of the returning citizen movement, in which men and women who'd spent many years away in prison had paid their debt and were coming home. And those men and women would go through the training program, but back then was also the beginning of what was called this time computerized applications for jobs. And if you checked the box saying, I've been convicted of a felony, you never got an interview. Right. So social enterprise for me was born of two things. A, as a nonprofit, I wanted to speak more truth to power, and I didn't want to be obligated to corporate funders who would not be happy with that. So I wanted to earn our own income and be self-sufficient. But I wanted to start to create jobs for men and women who I saw have great faith in their sense and their obligation to their families, yet they were turned away from time and time again from employment. So we created jobs for those men and women.
And you created lots of money. We're talking about a $12 million a year enterprise that continues today.
Yeah, and luckily under the leadership that I left behind, they have continued. So there's about 150 men and women on the payroll, and they do about 7,000 meals a day for DC public schools, and it's locally sourced scratch-cooked meals made by men and women who are now graduates of the program, who are now employed by the kitchen. Obviously, men and women with felony backgrounds aren't serving the food in schools. Those are other employees. But the point is, we were able to show that, again, you can buy local food, you can create good jobs, pay good wages, provide benefits. You can engage students in the process of developing their own menus for schools so that they become engaged in a healthier eating thing. And then the profit made is reinvested back into the nonprofit, which trains more people for jobs, makes sure less food is wasted, engages more volunteers. So again, this is the power of a social enterprise, that you have the ability to earn revenue, but you reinvest it back in communities.
Right. And also in the community at large. I mean, in terms of income, tax revenue brought in from income, right?
Oh, right
as opposed to prison. Can you throw out those numbers?
I mean, well, think about it. The LA Kitchen, which I just left in Los Angeles, produced about 200 men and women went through the program and graduated, and they'll earn $5 million a year in new salaries and pay over $225,000 in payroll taxes year end and year out. And that,
versus prison.
Versus prison, which costs basically $50,000 to $70,000 per person per year. So this is where it gets interesting, because what you're seeing is a growth of business that not only creates goods and services a la capitalism, but social return on investment a la, charity. So in effect, these are, from my perspective, a mayor's dream come true, because they decrease the need for charity. They increase the income coming in, but they also reinvest profit. And to me, for any mayor in America, that's the secret word. Profit doesn't leave town. And so that idea of there's a new style of business, frankly, mayors should be racing towards social enterprise saying, how can I get more of these kind of businesses? Because they are going to only make the community stronger in every possible way, whether it's social, economic. In fact, as I say many times, there's no profit without nonprofits. And because you can't run a town. I mean, if you look at Santa Fe or any town, without arts and culture, communities and health, healthcare, education, clean air, clean water, towns can't function, let alone attract new citizens or new business.
To then go out and spend their money in the economy on all sorts of things that feeds the profit industry.
Right, yeah. So in other words, you can't make profit without a stable, solid nonprofit sector. And I think that's still what drives a lot of the work I do today.
Right. And so let's talk about the power of the nonprofit sector and the numbers and what that looks like in terms of, they do get, you talk a lot about them sort of being treated as the stepchild, but let's talk about why they shouldn't be and look at the numbers and the value of the nonprofit sector.
It's important. I'm glad we're going down this road because I think many listeners think nonprofit and they think charity. Now, again, I've said, since I got started, charity is more about the redemption of the giver than the liberation of the receiver. And I've always wanted to try and flip that so that, I'm a sinner. I need all the redemption I can get, just not at the expense of another human. So, but if it's done well, everyone rises together, right? So that's a big part of what I do. But I became intrigued the more I went out and tried to talk about the economics of what I was doing and challenge people to see beyond Robert, the feeder of the poor, and I'd get all these, oh, what a great soup kitchen you run kind of thing. And it's like, dude, it's not a soup kitchen. And this is business. This is incredibly smart business. And I wish that people would understand that. Now, I'm part of a sector that represents the third biggest employer in America. In fact, just this weekend, great friends at Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore, Lester Solomon once again has done an annual report on the economic role of nonprofits. And this is the year that we are now equal to manufacturing in America as far as our role in the economy. Again, the third biggest employer. But what's interesting is, and I'll give you a classic example, many people might have watched yesterday, Senator Klobuchar just announced she was running for the presidency, right? And in her announcement, and she went through a long laundry list of people that she wanted the support of and acknowledged, but she didn't mention nonprofits. And this is classic to me because nonprofits represent almost 15% of the workforce in Minnesota. And again, a full third of the economy in America, yet not one of the presidential candidates. And rarely have I ever encountered a candidate who talks with any sense of understanding or vision about how can you partner with a group that has $3 trillion in assets, $350 billion in annual revenue, 14 million employees. We channel the energy of 70 million Americans through volunteerism, and you can't make profit without us. So to me, there isn't a candidate that is viable, literally, that is viable that doesn't include in their economic vision for America the third biggest employer.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about also being it would be the seventh biggest country in the world.
Economically. Yeah. It would be like we literally, the nonprofit sector would be on the UN Security Council if we were a country. Yet we don't have a say in the smallest towns' economic vision.
And what is the reason for that? The root?
Well, I believe, honestly, if you look at the evolution of the sector, we are the feminized part of the American economy. 7 out of 10 nonprofits are led by or were founded by women. And I think this really boils down to economic sexism, that the sector has always been viewed as we're lesser thans. In fact, most leaders and most people still have a very bifurcated view of the economy in which it's seen that for-profit businesses drive the economy, do business. They are the male side of this equation, the .com world. Charities are nice. They do good deeds. They do God's work, and these are the .orgs. And I think that kind of economic kind of bifurcation, that charities do good work while for-profits drive the economy, is wildly flawed.
Yeah.
Yet most people are trapped, and it's understandable. It's almost like when I first went out on that truck and the way I viewed the homeless. Similarly, we oftentimes come with kind of baked-in understanding that can be deeply flawed. Yeah. And in fact, I think
the country needs to go through what you went through.
I was about to go very much into that same direction. I think we're seeing that in America, how things that were taken for granted, Civil War statues, suddenly people are stopping and saying, whoa, they were baked into so many of our society's town squares, we never really looked up and saw racism. We saw history, maybe, I don't know. But the point is, I think Americans and white Americans, I think, are starting to see things through a different lens. And part of that process, I hope, will include the role of nonprofits that too often we're viewed as either super leftists who want to, basically take the world and drag it into this socialist kind of utopia, or, we're super conservative churches, and the fact is we're like the nonprofit sector is like the rest of America. We are hardworking, industrious, innovative people who just want to make the community better.
Right, and enjoy our jobs and have some purpose.
Yeah. Well, and let's dig in deeper, man. Whether it's men and women who are homeless or people who come in to volunteer. I've often said, man, everyone who came into the kitchens I've worked at came looking for something. They were trying to find that place where they could feel like they were contributing. They were making a difference. And that to me is if you 99.9% of the people on their deathbed wished, I just wish I left a mark. Whether it was in the love I had of my family and friends, or the role I played in making the world a better place. And I think nonprofits have the ability to channel all of that energy, that deeper hunger. This is kind of what I really discovered all I wanted to do was feed more people better food for less money,
Yeah.
And I wanted to train people for jobs.
Right.
But I became enamored by this kind of deeper hunger that I encountered of everybody. Who just, there was an enthusiasm that I'd see almost daily in whether it was the kind of the participation in the system in which food wasn't being wasted, people were being trained, beautiful meals were being produced. But I mean, people would literally be enthusiastic. I want to come back, whether it was chefs, anybody. I mean, we had presidents come and volunteer at the DC Kitchen. And there was that sense that everybody shared of like, this is really cool. And I say that not out of self-aggrandizement, just to let listeners know that if this is ringing a bell with you, you're not alone. There's hundreds of millions of people who have this great sense of, I want to make Santa Fe, New Mexico, the United States, the world a better place. Where do I go? Where do I sign up? I'm ready. And in fact, the work I do now is very much focused on elders in America because I believe that aging and ageism is one of the most profound issues that's going to hit again, this state, this country, this world. Never before in the history of the world have people lived this long. Yet rarely have people been more unprepared or disconnected, economically unprepared for their extra years in their life. But also they're isolated and alone and oftentimes very distant from family. And so that's going to test our mettle as a society. How do we treat our elders?
Yeah, and you also refer to it as a Me Too movement.
Well, it is
an extension of the Me Too movement.
Oh, I mean, women outlive men, women outnumber men. I say wrinkles are the new tattoos. This is a moment in which women should rightly confront, ageism and all these other things that hold them back. But let's go back to our talk about the nonprofit sector. Next year is going to be the 100th anniversary of suffrage, the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. Yet it took 100 years to elect 100 women to Congress. So there is an element of whether it is why as a country do we hold back this feminine side of the American economy, the nonprofit sector? Why don't we elect more women? Why don't we acknowledge that role that women are beautiful throughout their lives? So in effect, there is a giant moment here in which all of these things that I've worked on all my life, whether it's this idea of, I always say, wrinkle food, wrinkle people, no waste. I mean, I've made a career out of taking food that our society wastes and using it to try and create an equal place so that the people our society undervalue have a role. But I'm really hoping we can start to say, as wrong as it might be to throw away an estimated 40% of the food we produce, and a lot of it just because it has a wrinkle or a bruise, isn't it just as wrong to waste the potential of a person because they have a wrinkle or the metaphorical bruise of incarceration or addiction or foster care?
Yeah, and can you talk about our generation's worst definition? I'm sorry, our generation's worst failure, what you call?
Well, it's funny, man, because I talk with young people quite a bit, and I talk about success. And I always say, man, one of the worst failures I've ever seen has been our generation's version of success. I'm a baby boomer, right? I just turned 60. And I'm still, pretty badass about what I do in my life, but nonetheless, I represent a generation that has, that had more freedom, more education, and a better soundtrack than virtually any generation in the history of the world. So there is a question, though, and I think almost on a daily basis, you have people looking in the mirror wondering, couldn't I have done more with my life? I had all these things, and I have still a lot of material things, but somehow there's something missing.
Right. And the idea that you were talking about, the Carnegie Rockefeller model of making your money and then trying to cover all your life and then trying to cover up for the damage when you're old.
Yeah, and this has been the historic construct of charity, that you still see Bill Gates and God bless him, Warren Buffett still rolling around the world saying, again, make a bunch of money, but then give it back. And I've always said Carnegie and Rockefeller, their model was make as much money you can in your life by any means necessary, and then give some back at the end of your life to offset the damage you did, making as much money as you could. And the future is your philanthropy is how you make your money every day. What kind of employer you are. And I think more importantly, for a generation of consumers, young people who don't have the extra money our generation did to write a check at the end of the year to charity, their motto, I think, is going to be, how can where I spend my money be my philanthropy?
And we need to take a break, so we'll be back after these short messages.
Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me. Talk to me. In your own sweet gentle way. Let me hear. Tell me, dear. Tell me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me. Talk to me. In your own.
And welcome back, everybody. I have a rock star as far as I'm concerned. He's one of my rock stars, Robert Egger, who is the founder and former CEO of the DC Central Kitchen, which he led for 24 years, 7 days a week. He's been a leader in the food recovery, job training, social enterprise movement since 1989. I call him the father of social enterprise.
You're being very kind.
That is my new title for you. So you're going to help us put the pieces together today and really help us move forward into the future. How do we begin this process sort of at its root in terms of our mindset?
Well, hey, thank you for having me back. It's a real honor to be, with you again today, in which I keep thinking about the Beatles, phase 2 in which Robert gets his oats. But anyway, I became mesmerized as a kid, about this kind of .com.org divide. It's kind of a clumsy economic principle. And it suggests, with .com you get, goods and services a la capitalism, and with .org you get charity. And I became fascinated by the idea of, well, I want both. Why can't I get both? And of course, we've seen over the decades, when we were kids, for example, you went to the Goodwill, and the Goodwill took a sofa you might have donated and converted it, oftentimes offering people a chance to learn a skill while they did that. And then you bought it. You got a new sofa. Somebody got a gig. The sofa didn't get thrown away. So there was a sense of, hey man, that's good business. Everybody wins something. So I became mesmerized by this idea of everybody wins. Everybody gets a certain prize when they come home. And that led me to start businesses in the mid 1990s that started to say, let's create jobs for men and women who need work. Let's use food that might have been wasted and support local farmers. Let's go out to the farmers and say, look, you can donate these fruits and vegetables when they're about to be rotten, or I can come out a week early and buy them at a reduced price, but at least you're getting something. And because I bought it, I can now resell it. And that allowed me to say to Washingtonians, whether it's people who went through a catering company or contracts we had for school food, and in Los Angeles with senior meals, not only are you getting a good meal, you're helping to support the local food economy, you're helping to create a job, and then any profit is reinvested. So it's this idea, and I must admit, there's a lot of different ways to sell products like this, and many people go to the open market, and compete, if you will, in the kind of global marketplace. I'm interested in city government. Now, a lot of people would say that's a fool's errand, but the reality is government spends an inordinate amount of money on a daily basis with contracts. So whether they're food contracts or a variety of other things, government has to get a good value for the money for the taxpayers. But at the same time, they want good services so that so a city appears to be clean, orderly, thriving, all those kind of things. So that became very interesting. How do you work with a mayor? I look at, Mayor Weber, first full-time mayor here. He actually came to visit the LA Kitchen when he was running for governor. I became fascinated by, here's a guy who started Fast Company magazine, to a certain extent wildly open to ways in which he could, as the first mayor or his attempt to be the governor, really introduce some bold new ideas into a state that has many significant issues. And that to me is where social enterprise has the most tremendous opportunity.
I do have to say, and I will give a shout out to Javier Gonzalez, our former mayor, who was behind the Project Verde project that we talked about yesterday. He funded that. He was behind that endeavor. So that happened under his leadership. And so that's where, as you say, the mayors can play a critical, vital, important role in this.
Yeah. In fact, I worked with Mayor Hickenlooper before he was governor of Colorado's mayor of Denver. And he was the first mayor that had an office of strategic partnerships and in effect appointed 3 young women who came along and basically by helping nonprofits find each other, develop grants, pursue grant opportunities, they brought $50 million into Denver from outside Denver within 4 years. And to me, this is kind of thing where if I'm a mayor, I think most mayors look at the nonprofit sector and at best they think, well, they do good deeds. At worst, they think, hey, these nonprofits aren't paying property taxes. I got to figure out a way to get it. But what I dream is one that says, wow, these are really dynamic businesses. These people are passionate. They're really so dedicated to the community. If I can help them grow and become more stable vis-a-vis contracts with the city, this is going to be great because I'm getting, by channeling money to them via these contracts, I'm getting goods and services. I have to get quality service, but I'm also helping them to sustain so they don't have to come to the citizens and say, come to our gala, come to our fundraiser. They can create jobs and they're going to reinvest profit. So to me, a generation of educated mayors is the great missing ingredient for this explosion, not just of nonprofit efficiency, but a whole new explosion of social enterprise businesses.
Right. And reducing the need for nonprofits in the begin with.
And at the end of the day, that's always been my motivation. I mean, I've always said I love my job, but I hate my business. I mean, I love what I do, but at the end of the day, I had a real metamorphosis, or awakening rather, when I realized, I'd spent the better part of my 30s working, hard trying to come up with, really one of the most efficient nonprofits in America, but at the end of the day, I had to look in the mirror and say, dude, you're feeding primarily working people leftover food from restaurants. And that's never going to be right. You can make it efficient. It's certainly better than seeing food thrown away and people going hungry, but that can't be the right way to do it.
Right.
And that's what began, you and I were talking about this kind of 49-51 concept of, I tried to divide my brain metaphorically. 49% is always going to be, how can I feed more people better food for less money?
Right.
But the 51% is, how do we move beyond this? How do we as a country move beyond the need for food banks and charities? And this is where I think I find the most satisfaction. But to quote, Archbishop Camara, Brazilian archbishop, who famously said, when I fed the poor, they called me a saint. When I asked why they were poor, they called me a communist. Sometimes, sadly, the money's in the disease, not the cure.
Yeah, and yet we are sitting on the precipice of what you call an incredible social, political, economic opportunity right now, in all the issues that we're facing. So rather than see, as you say, make the problem part of the solution.
Right.
And you describe social enterprise as being economic Buddhism.
Yeah, it's the middle path between .com and .org. It's where you get the best of each. Again, you get goods and services, a la capitalism, but you get diminished need for social charities at the same time. And to me, this is the moment, because not only do you have a generation, my generation, that has given diligently to charities throughout their lives, reaching a point of a little bit of frustration. There's a little bit of donor burnout. But you also have, and this is more germane, a generation of 100 million people under 35, a generation raised doing service. Virtually every single student of every single university has performed service. They had to graduate. So there is a coercive nature, but I guarantee you a big hunk of them have internalized. But at the same time, they don't want to do charity. They're looking for a new way, whether we talked yesterday, whether it's the way I spend my money every day, whether it's where I work. But many of them dream of launching their own social businesses. And to me, this is the kind of thing that if a mayor realizes that there's an opportunity to say to a younger generation, make it Santa Fe. This is a town that wants your dynamic, best new ideas. And this city's willing to go out on a limb to do some, what might seem at first to be counterintuitive, but we have nothing to gain and everything, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain by trying new ideas.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah, brother.
Yeah,
That's
right
what
on,
I
man.
say. As you say, right on, brother. And, also I thought it was interesting what you said, when we graduate, we give kids the choice between doing good deeds or making money. And I think I would venture to say 98% of the population is torn in that struggle.
Yeah,
feels
they are.
frustrated by it.
Well, we talked about it yesterday, and people just want to feel like they made a difference. Whether it's when they leave the office or when they leave this mortal coil, they want to think, man, I was here. I made a difference. I sent forth a small ripple of hope and daring somehow in my life. And I think if more employers recognize that their employees just want to make a difference, to me, this is another fantastic opportunity for the average business leader to recognize that whether there's employees who want that sense of participation, but there's also consumers that are looking for that connection, that if I buy this product, something good will happen for Santa Fe, for New Mexico, for America, for the world.
Absolutely. And also, again, going back to the disconnected youth, I see them as this boiling pot of possibility and energy, entrepreneurial in nature, because they're living already on the edge. They're familiar with risk. It's not as scary for them. That's a resource. That's actually a resource that they're surviving in difficult situations. And to me, that's very close to the entrepreneurial landscape. And I can't say that enough, because once you step out of your cushy job and you're out there trying to make it in the world as an entrepreneur, and if anybody would know this, the mayor would, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Run, get ready, get set, go, and off you run. And you got to keep up. And it's very challenging. And yet these kids, I think about these young kids, like our foster kids who are out there on their own, yet they're still here. They still have hope, in their spirits and a drive to want to participate, a passion to be seen even. And that can drive passion in a business.
Well, it's one of the reasons years ago I started a thing called Campus Kitchen, saying, look, there's 60,000 school cafeterias that are closed all afternoon, all night, and all weekend. What amazing learning labs, for one thing. A great place to get service hours. I became mesmerized by intergenerational after-school gardens, intergenerational mentoring programs, snacks and meals to go for working parents made by kids in the after-school cooking program. But this idea of teaching kids, I think it's been said many times, but we're teaching kids how to get a job, not how to create a job. And I think if we taught more entrepreneurial energy, again, Americans have always been, I think that's the benchmark of our country. It's what people fought and died for. It's the ability to do what you want, to chart your own course. Yet we constantly, but again, we go back to graduation day. I've done multiple commencement addresses and again, tried to say to a generation, the future isn't giving back. That's what my generation did. And it was fine. It was done with love in our hearts, but we didn't achieve what we had hoped. So, we have nothing to lose by again saying to a younger generation, hey man, it's your turn. How can we support you? Not necessarily you have to fit into my box because I'm older than you.
And in your own words, it's just smart. It's smart business. Not right, not left, Democrat, Republican. It is just smart for everyone. And let's talk a little bit about changing the nonprofit sector in a pragmatic way. So what are some of its limitations? You say it's designed for survival versus efficacy is one thing. What are other areas that it needs to kind of break free from or gain more support in?
Well, that's why I think many of us like social enterprise, because the philanthropic construct, I'm going to make a bunch of money and give it back. We talked about that yesterday. It's deeply flawed. We talked yesterday about I think the feminized part of the American economy, which is the nonprofit sector, which is led primarily by women. So there's lots of things, but I do honestly believe that the sector has to kind of own its own economic strength. We are the third biggest employer in America. And as we look towards 2020, we have to acknowledge that whether it's a mayor, a city council member, a governor, a president, nobody who gets up, anybody who gets up in front of you and starts talking about how they're going to rebuild the American economy and doesn't talk about their third biggest employment sector, doesn't talk about the energy of 14 million voters, doesn't talk about 70 million volunteers. To me, again, we talked yesterday about the baby boomers and how every morning 10,000 people look in the mirror and turn 70. And that's going to go on for a decade and a half. There's an army of those people who want to do something in their later years. So I believe a candidate who understands the power of American volunteerism, this thing that de Tocqueville, when he traveled America in the 1800s and wrote Democracy in America, he marveled at it. This connectivity we have as a people. And I think that when you talk about some people might roll their eyes, but when you think about energy policy in America, the energy and idealism and patriotism of 70 million people who just want to make their community stronger. Man, if I'm a mayor, it's like, man, bring unto me these masses and let's get it on.
Yeah, and passion is the foundation and the very spirit of entrepreneurial endeavor. Period.
Right.
I mean, really, it really is what drives. It's like, wait a minute, why aren't we making this why are we not making this connection?
I think it's also what consumers want. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly looking for, I want a good deal, but for heaven's sakes, help me, help my community by the way I spend my money every day. If I know that you pay a good wage to your employees, it means that they're not going to have to go to the food bank. If I know that you support local farmers, it means they're not going to have to go to the federal government and get farmed. I mean, there's so many different ways in which daily commerce is. And we talked about the difference between the boycott model of let's punish. I'm interested in the boycott. How do you metaphorically channel market forces and reward great local businesses that, again, pay good money, pay good wages, reinvest in the community, support local agriculture? The more you support them with your money, the less you're going to have to contribute to charity. And
let's talk about the limitations of the grant process and how that is flawed.
No, don't even get me started. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the philanthropy is primarily, and again, it's evolved, but it's still white dudes giving away white dudes money. I mean, it is to a certain extent redistributing ill-gotten gains. Now, no disrespect. I mean, but the reality is, when you make hundreds of millions of dollars or millions of dollars, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to really look in the mirror and wonder, in making this money, did I inadvertently cause some damage? And so I just go back to a different way of trying to generate money. And that would, in effect, diminish the need for charity while it consistently diminishes the availability of money for grants. But you get my point. I think the experiment, as glorious as it is, of saying I'm going to make money and give some back near the end of my life, has not proven to be as effective as we'd like. And I think for all of us, I'm not saying anybody's bad for wanting to do that. I'm just saying that as an American, I'd prefer that we had less people in line at a food bank, less food being thrown away. So like I said, I just feel like at this stage of our country, this is a moment where leaders should be really pretty daring in challenging us to look beyond this .com.org divide, look beyond charity and good deeds and start to really think about citizenship and what does it mean to be a good citizen in this country and how do we give back through daily commerce?
Yeah, also, and you talk about the construct of philanthropy as a chokehold on innovation and growth. And also just seeing ourselves as the separation that nonprofits are not allowed to really talk business from money from a business standpoint, nor from a political standpoint, that we're not allowed into that political spectrum or even to advocate for politically. Again, I go back to this is deeply rooted in, again, the fact that these are women-led businesses. In my opinion, this is the last great vestige of sexism, is this ginormous part of the American economy that is told, shut up and feed the poor. That in effect, we as for-profit companies have First Amendment rights akin to the individual vis-a-vis Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, but charities don't. And ultimately, my attitude is I'm just as much of the American economy as any for-profit business. I'm just as much of a viable leader. I've made payroll for 30 years without fail. I'll stand up against any business community, any business person in any town and challenge them based on how long have you made payroll? How long has your name been on the front of the check? Mine's been 30 years. But the point is, I think we have been told that all we're eligible for is a little bit of the leftover money at the end of the year, and we have to be silent when it comes to who is going to be elected and what are the policies going forward. And I think that time or that idea needs to be challenged. And also compete for scraps, for the leftover scraps.
Well, and again, years ago, man, I went to India because I had read in a book, and it just fascinated me to no ends, that the British never, ever had more than 3,000 officers stationed in India over a century and a half of their rule. And I became fascinated. I mean, 350 million people on an entire subcontinent versus 3,000 white dudes. And again, my pop was in the military. I understand command structure. But when I went, kind of intrigued, how they do that. And it was so obvious when I got there and was at Nehru, who was the first prime minister's home, which is a museum now. But it was divide and conquer. Keep Indians divided by race, caste, geography, language, and fighting each other. And it's like I was there and it's like, oh my God, that's the nonprofit sector in America. Arts versus housing. We all fight each other in this arena for the scraps off the table versus stopping, as every great liberation movement has. Whether it's the suffrage movement, whether it's migrant farm workers, whether it's African Americans, you name it. Suddenly people stop and say, wait a second, we've been fighting each other for so long. Maybe we're not the enemy. And to me, this is the great moment for nonprofit sector to realize that, yes, we need to fund, and yes, all our jobs individually are powerful, but we represent more than just an army of individual charities. We represent, in my opinion, the best of America. We are kind of that faith in our fellow citizens made manifest, in that we go to work every single day trying to lift people up, not out of pity, but that sense of if I do this, our community will be stronger. Our country will be stronger. Our world will be stronger. And I think that energy is something that we've never effectively channeled, both politically or economically.
Right. It's literally time for unification and mobilization.
Yeah, not every day, man. I'm not asking people to lower their flag. I'm just saying, look, there's strategic moments. And let's be really, kind of specific here. What I've suggested is that we should at least ask anyone who's running for office to at least acknowledge the role we play in the economy, that we are the third biggest employer in America. We are a significant sources of outside investment dollars coming to every single community. And as we said yesterday, you can't make profit without communities of faith, arts and culture, healthcare, education, the things we do.
Do you think we need to create some kind of council? The nonprofits come together and
there are many.
A collective of some sort and approach the mayor?
Well, I think there have historically been many attempts at councils. But again, we try to find consensus. So what I've tried to do is say, what are the things that unite us? Look, we're all judged by low administrative overhead, which is an intellectual albatross around our collective necks. B, no media covers us with any depth. And think about it, $350 billion gets donated to charity, yet the average citizen can't tell you what a good charity is, except for, they're the ones with the lowest administrative overhead, which again is counter to everything that makes business strong. This idea of investment in your staff and, all that kind of stuff. So in effect, what we have here is an amazing amount of energy and money, and time, and entrepreneurial energy being expended without the kind of results that we really should have. So my thing is, I would like to at least elect a mayor who shows up on day one saying, in effect, I get it, and I really want to find a way to support the nonprofits in our community, but also more importantly, take them to a whole new level where we get better efficiencies, we have better coordinated services, and we ultimately decrease the need for charity by the way we operate.
And demand more. We need to come together and stop selling ourselves short.
Yeah. Again, my bag is constantly about how do I meet today's current need but diminish future demands simultaneously. And that's a lot of what my experiments have been over the last 30 years.
Yeah, you also talk about the importance of making more political connections, like Tyson's involvement. You want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, we
have a minute left.
Yeah, we just greenwash too many companies. We allow them to do things that cause the problem, and in exchange for a little bit of money, we let them get away with it. And I think we just need to start having the courage to call out some of our donors for their behaviors. Yeah,
and you also just in general talk about accountability across the board. That maybe it's important for everyone, including the nonprofit sector.
The joy of the internet is transparency, and I think we should race towards it as both charities, as government, as businesses, because as consumers we should demand it. Imagine a mayor who came in and said, you know what, I'm going to create a way that I want to incentivize the nonprofit sector to be high performers, and the best way to do that is to get the donors to start to say, I respect you and I love you and I've been giving you money, but you're not going anywhere. And I'm going to move my money over here because not only are they going to deliver better, but I'm going to get a better return on my taxes annually because this is a program that's generating the economic results. And I think that playing with the tax code so that you could actually attain wealth. Right now, the only way to attain wealth in America is to invest in the stock market, which is going to be whether it's the war machine, the gas machine. And imagine if you could invest in your community. We watch corporate America elect people specifically to protect their profits. And we're told our integrity must be preserved. And I'm like, I don't need my integrity protected. I want to have the equal opportunity to legislate back. So like I said, I think what we're seeing particularly with, young dynamic leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others is a rapidly growing young, rank of younger electeds who are going to be full on, So, I mean, my thing is the smart money is don't try and swim against that current, man. Turn into it. This is like, the undertow, as we used to say in California. You never try and swim against it, man.
Absolutely. So Robert Egger is who we've been speaking with, and I'm calling him the father of social enterprise. Sorry, I'll just take the risk and say that. He, one of the original social enterprises, DC Central Kitchen, who he's fed 30 million?
Lots.
In the millions, I promise.
Joyfully lots.
Joyfully. How can people get a hold of you?
Well, I have a website, robertegger.org. So it's Robert and then EGGER.org. And that's just where I put a bunch of my stuff. So if anybody's interested, but I'm going to be wandering the streets of Santa Fe looking for trouble.
And we're going to be finding you, I promise.
I'll look forward to it.
Thank you so much for being with us.
You too, MK. Thanks very much.
Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me. Talk to me. In your own sweet gentle way. Let me hear. Tell me, dear. Tell me. Talk to me, tell me what I want to know. The many ways you speak of love, I've heard before, and it sounds so good every time. Please say the part I love just once more. Talk to me, hold me close, whisper, talk to